Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Creative Connections webinar. This week, we are very excited to have with us the extraordinary Aunty Dr. Tjanara Goreng Goreng from the Wakka Wakka people and the Wulli Wulli people, exploring the topic, understanding self as a leader in times of crisis. My name is Ian RT Colless. I am from the Devel clan of the Gundungurra people, and I am the grandson of the extraordinary, the late Aunty Dawn Colless. As a Devel man of the Gundungurra, I pay my deep respects to the Gadigal of the Eora, where I stand today. As a coexisting member of the oldest surviving cultures in the world, indeed the known universe, I'm a result of this never, the dreaming, not the dream time, as we exist in a place that is before us and must come after us. I have not one single doubt that if we hold our feet grounded and we stand strong in this current crisis in which we all collectively find ourselves within today, generations after us may look back with great pride and admiration. In a book by Dr. Diane Johnson titled Lighting the Way, Reconciliation Stories, my grandmother, Aunty Dawn Colless, was quoted to say, "Reconciliation is like a good marriage. Take Roy, my grandfather, and I, for example. We've been married for 53 years, and sometimes we have bad days, and sometimes we have good days. That's marriage. It's give and take." I share this quote as I am a byproduct of my nan and my pop's love and their ability to constantly reconcile. In this, our last day of the 2020 Reconciliation Week, discovering oneself in Mabo Day. In this spirit, I would like to ask you, as my grandmother had before me, to take our hand. I ask you to stand with my peoples, to listen, not just to acknowledge, but to action, to be open to learn with us and to walk forward in the transformative power of reconciliation, and to join with us the oldest living story, older than time itself. In paying respect to the Gadigal of the Eora, I describe country. It is a country surrounded by salt water, light, and sky. It is a country that has magnificent cliff faces, with the ocean smashing into it, daily carving in its existence. Abundant and cheerful birds who sing me awake every day. I too pay my unstoppable respect to elders past, present, and our future, and our elders present here today, including our non-Indigenous contemporaries. If you would like, please share the country that you are beaming in today within the chat feature, which is just below. We have Wangal country, we have the Kulin Nation, we have Aranda, we have Gundungurra, we have Jagera, Turrbal. How fantastic. All of these beautiful countries that are coming in today. Thank you so much for being here today. Today, the 3rd of June, is a very special day. It is Mabo Day. I too rightly pay my respect to the critical significance of this day. Mabo Day commemorates Eddie Quirky Mabo and his decade-long effort to make the Australian government officially recognise that his people own Mer Island. On the 3rd of June 1992, the High Court of Australia acknowledged that Mabo and his people had traditional land ownership and agreements that it was made to his people of the Mer to determine their own land today. Mabo Day has been celebrated in Australia since 2002 as a turning point in Indigenous people's rights in Australia. It is celebrated annually today on the 3rd of June as part of the National Reconciliation Week. Currently on screen is a blue PowerPoint slide with text and video boxes on it and an Auslan interpreter. I am a queer man in my early to mid-late 30s. I have brown messy hair, black round glasses, wearing a shirt. I am sitting in front of an abstract cultural painting of the Gangara in a lounge room with soft light pouring in. Creative Connections is delivered entirely online. You can choose the sessions in which are relevant to your needs, interest. All webinars are free and will be published after this live session. Normally takes us around a week. Please feel free to share these YouTube sessions with anyone whom you think might be interested. These series focus around 3 key themes. 1, leadership adaptation. 2, digital adaptation. And 3, artistic adaptation. I encourage you to explore the schedule and to choose what might work for you. Before I hand it over to the extraordinary Aunty Dr. Tjanara, I've been asked to go through some features of today's session. Firstly, live captioning is available on Zoom, and if you can't already see the captions below, you can turn them on by pressing the CC button, which is at the bottom of the screen. Laura Pike from our team is running today's chat feature. I invite and I encourage you to utilize this chat to share with your thoughts, aspirations, solutions, ideas, resources with each other, whatever you like. This chat feature, again, is at the bottom of the Zoom window. A Q&A session will occur with Aunty Dr. Tjanara Goreng Goreng and myself after today's session. Kevin Duprez, my manager, and the team will be looking after this. So if you have any questions, please add it in the Q&A section, again, at the bottom of the screen, and we'll do our best to respond to you. But if we are unable to, and we run over time, we will do our best to get back to you. Or alternatively, you can send us an email at leadershipprogram@theaustraliacouncil.gov.au and someone will get back to you. If you're having tech issues and something isn't working for you, please raise your hand and Laura will be in contact with you to fix this. Finally, the Australian Council for the Arts will be recording today's session as with each session. These recordings will be accessible, as suggested before, via YouTube or the Creative Connections webpage on the Australian Council for the Arts main page. There are 3 main webinar streams that the Australian Council currently offers. 1, Think Inside the Square, which weekly occurs on Tuesday, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Creative Connections, currently today on Wednesdays at 3 p.m. and Fridays at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then on Friday, we have our First Nations roundtables for artists and cultural independence, and organisations occur with the between 2 p.m. and 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with the chair of the First Nations roundtable, the charming Wesley Enoch AM, and deputy chair of the Australian Council for the Arts, the delightful Leanne Buckskin, in ongoing conversations on culture and arts. Today, however, we have with us Dr. Tjanara Goreng Goreng from the Wakka Wakka and Wulli Wulli people. Aunty will present today's Creative Connections webinar titled Understanding Self as a Leader in Times of Crisis. This PowerPoint in relation to Indigenous cultural intellectual property right is the copyright of Aunty Dr. Tjanara Goreng Goreng. Currently on screen, there is a PowerPoint slide that introduces the speaker, Aunty Tjanara, and an image of this wonderful woman's headshot. I'm speaking to you at what I know is an increasingly challenging time, a time of disruption in all of our lives. from all of the countries that you're streaming in from. This disruption has brought with it grief to people, financial difficulties, adaptations, boundaries, separations to many, an ongoing cultural divide. An international human rights movement continues. The campaign against violence on ongoing systemic racism towards Black people continues. And this campaign has now escalated as people stand and go to the streets, risking their very lives in the global pandemic, the COVID-19 climate we discover ourselves in today. How do we reconcile? And how do we reconcile with ourselves? The sum of all of these difficulties for many during this time has seen enormous changes in our daily lives for us all. As we have all faced challenges before, this one is different. This time, we join with all peoples across the globe in our instinctive compassion to heal. Across the countries you are streaming in from, we have all bared witness to people who have come together to help others. But as a queen has said before me, honey, if you can't love yourself, then you can't love others. How does one find themselves in a time of crisis? And what characterizes you as a custodian or as a leader? And what distinctive natures or qualitative features of oneself are in times of crisis? Together we are tackling this disease, and I'm assuming and I'm sure that I can speak on behalf of Aunty Dr. Tjanara and myself to reassure you, to know that you have the ability to reflect inwards, to find the power and fuel to heal oneself. If we know where we stand individually, we, in respect and in relations to each others, can remain united to resolute and to make sure that we can overcome this crisis. Aunty Dr. Tjanara is a published poet, a writer, performer of traditional song, culture, dance, and a contemporary Maori artist. For over 30 years, Aunty Tjanara has been working with groups and organisations in Australia domestically and internationally across the globe in transforming cultural leadership, mentoring, and Aunty Tjanara is an adjunct professor at the University of Canberra with a PhD in the road to eldership. She's also an economic policy researcher. She's with the Australian National University. She has been an academic with 5 Australian universities and a director at 2, including the foundation director of the Charles Sturt University in New South Wales and the director of the Centre for Aboriginal Education at the University of Melbourne. Aunty Tjanara has extensive public service background in federal government in New South Wales and Queensland state governments, as well as Director and Senior Policy Advisor to Prime Minister and Cabinet and the Office of Indigenous Policy and Coordination, and the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade, and a whole number of statutory declarations. Finally, today, the Creative Connection sets out to ask, how do we learn and listen from our elders and to reflect to oneself in complex times? Aunty Tjanara, I hand it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ian. Well, hi everyone. So I'm going to, hope you can see me on that screen. Yes, it looks like. So I'm going to sing a song first to thank you for being here and to invite you all to come and learn from my clan. Karenina namin tuju maberonu, Karenina namin tuju maberonu, Karenina namin tuju maberonu, Gaya mamarangu and jagungungayu. Thank you. Hello everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. So I'm going to be talking to you about caring for the self as a leader in times of crisis. And I want you to think about, well, of course, we've had a number of those crises in the last few months in Australia. What I want you to think about is, what's it like to be in the eye of a storm? So when you think about managing the self in times of crisis, these crises are usually times when emotions like fear and so on emerge very quickly. And so one of the important things is to be able to manage the self, is to know the self, but also to be able to know what you feel and what's going on, so that it doesn't override, your feelings don't override your intellect in a time of crisis. So I think what I'd like to do here is share my screen. So I'm just going to, oops, I've got to make it a slideshow. So I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see the whole thing. Is that working? Share. Okay. So a picture of me. So let me just go to the next slide. Times of crisis, we're interested in really managing the self. So to know the self, one has to know what the self is. So what is the self? The self is really our being. It is who you really are. And through your being, you then know what it is you do know in terms of your wisdom and your knowledge. And then you also know how to act. So as a whole being, you know that every part of yourself, from the spiritual, the cultural, the emotional, the physical, the mental, you know yourself deeply. To know the self deeply, one has to examine the self. So as people say, a bit of navel gazing. So throughout the life, it's important to look at the self and be willing to look at the self. If we just go through life, one job to the next, one relationship to the next, etc., not really thinking about our purpose or our meaning or our reason for being, we don't get to know the self. So I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of our culture and our cultural wisdom, but also from the knowledge that I learned through doing my PhD, looking at the sacred leadership of Western leadership theory and the sacred leadership of Aboriginal culture, which is what I did my PhD on. But more importantly, what I do is the work around knowing the self through knowing your own emotional development. So these things are things that happen to every human being. And this slide is really just about, for me, sacred leadership is about knowing the self. It's about knowing the spiritual self, which is at the center of everything. And in our culture, we're taught that we are spirit beings before we are human beings. That we come onto the planet for a purpose, whatever that purpose may be, whether it be a mother, a father, or somebody unique like the people in these pictures, or whether we are all here for a purpose, and that purpose has meaning, whatever that purpose is. So for us, we're taught that we are sacred beings, that we are all sacred beings. We are born innately sacred, spiritual beings, and that within us we carry the innate qualities of a sacred being. And later in this talk, I'll talk about what those innate qualities are. Essentially, there are 8 powers which can be used in your own leadership, and 35 virtues. So we are all born with these. How we use them and how we decide to use them in the world depends on how much we know and understand them, and then our practice through our being and our doing. So Kevin, I'll ask you to play the Dadiri video, if you would. I'd ask everybody to listen to this deep listening Dadiri from Aunty Rose Angama.
To know me is to breathe with me. To breathe with me is to listen deeply. To listen deeply is to connect. It's the sound of deep calling to deep. Dadidi, the deep inner spring inside us. We call on it, and it calls on us. We are river people. We cannot hurry the river. We need to move with the current and understand its ways. Wait for the rain to fill our rivers and water our thirsty earth. We watch our bush foods and wait for them to open before we gather them. We wait for our young people as they grow. The time for rebirth is now. If our culture is alive and strong and respected, it will grow. It will not die, and our spirit will not die. I believe that the spirit of Dadidi that we have to offer will blossom and grow. Not just within ourselves, but in our whole nation.
Thank you, Kevin. So am I back to sharing the screen? I'll just check where I am. I'll go back to, oh yes, I'm there. So let's, whoops, go to the next one. Whoops. Now this is not supposed to be there. Whoops, sorry. I'll just go to the next screen share. Okay, a little bit of tech there. So what we're interested in from the teaching of our elders is the connection, the relationship, and the communication. So the connection to the self is very important if we want to learn how to manage the self. In order to manage the self, one has to know the self. So part of what Aunty Miriam teaches in Dadiri is to listen deeply. And the first thing we have to listen to is the self. So on this slide, I show you a picture of what I say is the soul of the spirit. And in our language, we say Kurumpa, the soul. Tukapa is our sacred business. And we know that that Tukapa is part of the life that the law that we are given in order to live as human beings. So it's the soul living within the human body that is learning the sacred business, and knowing the sacred business can then be and act and do in the world as a human being. So when we learn our Chukapa, it's our values, our principles, our moral stand that allows us to be in the world. But one has to know the self, and who am I really? So we teach our children, or we taught our children, and we still do in a different way, that when they are born, they are sacred spiritual beings, and they come into the planet to be in human form with the purpose of having relationship. The first relationship is always with the self, then the relationship with Walcha family, Then the relationship with country, land. These are not in an order, they're just in a circle relationship. Walcha, Nura, Chukapa, family, land, law, and sacred business. So how do we learn to know the self? We are all brought up in societies which have cultures and learning systems, socialization systems. We come to know ourselves by the people around us. So it teaches us how and who and what we are. We learn from our parents, our teachers, from the system in which we live, wherever that is. However, it doesn't ever change the fact that you are a unique being, a sacred being who has a reason for being on the earth. And that if anyone else tells you differently, they're telling you wrong. So this is what we like to keep in mind. We're learning about ourselves. We're learning to be with ourselves. And so how is it that we learn to be with ourselves? Everybody grows up in the stages of human development, which are these, which I'm showing you on the slide. You can always look at these later for much more in-depth look. They're developed by Erik Erikson, who was a student of Freud, a well-known developmental psychologist at Harvard. So we know that if children's development continues along all these lines and there's no arrested development, they will emotionally, mentally, physically and spiritually grow through these hope, will, purpose, competence, fidelity, love and wisdom throughout their life. The important years are 0 to 7. So if any of your emotional development is arrested by any kind of abuse or other things going on in a family of origin, colonization, generational trauma, addiction, anything related to physical, sexual or psychological violence, your emotional development will be arrested and you will not be able to develop deep levels of caring for the self or empathy or compassion for the self and others. So it's very important in those early years that we help children grow well. And often many of us are taught the don't talk, don't trust, don't feel rules. So we don't learn about who we are. We learn about who we are in relation to everybody else, which isn't really knowing the self. So what we're interested in is how do we learn to know the self? Well, in our system, in the First Nation system, we're taught to know the self by knowing who we are. So our elder teachers are always telling us we are strong beings, we are who we are. We contain everything within ourselves that helps us live as a good human being throughout the life. But then we have relationships in which we have to interact, which is how we come to know the self in those relationships. It's how we develop our value system. It's how we develop our morals, how we develop our principles, how we develop our boundaries, and how we learn to act as self within relation with another human being. So we learn about anger, we learn about fear, we learn about crises, we learn about things that happen, whether they're natural crises or whether they're emotional crises. We learn how we react. We learn what we do during those times. So it's important to come to know the self. One of the very important things that Aboriginal culture always teaches a child is to know the self as a strong human being who is totally within itself, has everything it needs to be able to manage. And that the role of your elders, your parents and your teachers are to help you grow into that in a very strong way. So you become somebody who has love for the self, knowing that everything about you is pure and perfect just the way it is. And so no one can tell you that you're less than anyone else. So through this process of Kanini Juwaku, we care about each other, we look after each other, and we look after everything around us, including country and animals and flora. When we talk about sacred leadership is really knowing the self in relation to everything else in a system. So everything in a system is circular in the world. A person who has arrested development is usually their leadership ends up at egocentric, a bit like someone like Donald Trump. A person, and it's all about me, it's my way or the highway. A person who is a socialized leader, it's all about my class system, about the amount of money I have, the cars I drive, the suburb I live in, the class I have, the social status I have, whether I'm the president of a company, the vice president of the school, or the prime minister of the country. when I get to an independent and sacred level, I begin thinking about my values, my morals, my boundaries, and my spiritual system. And this helps me become an emotionally healthy human being. So I'm more interested about how everything interacts with each other, how everything affects everything else, and how then when I'm in a systemic system, if anything changes within that system, I'm capable of being able to go with it, manage it, and be still with it. So imagine a cyclone, for example. A cyclone, and I'm panicking, I'm not thinking about anything else but how it's going to affect me, what I'm going to lose. And so I'm an egocentric type of leader who's really just thinking about me. So I'm taking care of me and never mind anybody else. If I'm a socialized leader, I'm about taking care of my things, my attachment to things. If I'm an independent and sacred leader, I'm thinking about not just myself, but everyone in this system. And I'm also capable of setting the boundary with my own emotions about feeling calm. So I tend to be somebody who can be in the eye of the storm. And the eye of the storm is the center where everything is calm. So I myself am calm. I've spent a good 30, 40 years of my life practicing being still in times of panic all around me, of crisis, because I know it's going to happen in the world. When I grew up, we had floods, we had all sorts of interesting natural disasters, which my parents lived with, learned to live with and managed. And we learned to live with it too. I used to become quite excited by natural disasters. For example, the river, flooding everywhere in Western Queensland. And I got quite used to it. And so we learned how to be still with that. We learned how to watch the seasons and be still with the seasons. We learned how to watch floods and bushfires and those kinds of things and be still with them and still know how to survive. So someone who's at a higher level of consciousness and thinking is thinking not just about themselves, but about everyone else. And in order to do that, to be empathic and conscious, one has to be calm. So when I'm thinking about these higher levels of thinking, it's because I'm capable, because I've emotionally developed. And I've developed well in my life, and I haven't had stunted growth from trauma. But if I've had trauma, it is possible for myself to go back and recover. And part of that is cultural and spiritual process. If I go back to those processes, I can recover from the trauma that enables me to be the kind of leader that can be still. So what is interesting about this is that a leader knows, a leader at this sacred level, at an independent level, they know themselves. They know who they are. They know what their boundaries are and what their value system is. What I'm interested in is in our culture, how that's brought about. And it's brought about through our elders who are invited to become elders because they've become the embodiment of the wisdom of our chukapa. And one of those main qualities is humility. But they're capable of being wise because they're capable of looking at every part of a situation and sitting back and making a decision based on lots of things, on the impact of other people, not just on the impact on themselves, the impact on the land, the impact on the animals, the impact on the law. They will make those decisions in consultation and collaboration with everybody else. So these men and these women who are invited to become elders who have already been practicing for a long time this capacity to be still. So how do I become still? I have to learn how to become still. And throughout our cultural learning as children and as young adults and adults, we learn the Dadiri. So Dadiri is something that happens in every clan, not just Miriam Rose's. But she has come up with a way to spread it around Australia and explain it well. It's a practice of being still with the self, of being in connection with Bayami, who is the higher being, the creator being, knowing the Kurumpa, the self, the soul, and that I am a sacred being. My connection to my country, Nura land, gives me that ability to see the system of that country and how that has to be taken care of. My relationship to family means I'm not just a lone individual person on the earth. My relationship to my Jukaba gives me the values by which I can live. And so knowing all of these things, my being is able to make decisions. So how do I enable this kind of self-care through managing myself. We're taught in our culture a number of foundational laws. All the clans are taught these, all the children in all the clans. And then, of course, those clans have their own way of speaking, language, ceremonies, songs, and dances. However, we all learn the idea of respect and honouring other people, respecting, honouring the self, knowing that the self is perfect and pure just as it is, and that I have all the gifts I need to get through life, and that I will learn what I need to learn from my relationship with others and my relationships in the world. And respect and honour nonduality of the earth, the planet on which we live. The law of harmony and unconditional love teaches us to care for all living things, to be in the service of all. I can't be in the service of all if I haven't already been in the service of myself, which is to know the self, to allow the self to grow and become wise, and then be humble in that wisdom and have those 4 things that are important: family, chukapa, law, land, and relationship. And I start to become somebody who's very still and knowing that it's important to have this regard and love and harmony. To be in harmony with my own feelings is to be in kanyini. So to know those feelings. Someone who grows up in a family where they're traumatized, they don't learn their feelings. They're taught not to feel. But we have to learn that there are, 15 or 20 feelings, and that I'm okay with whatever feeling I have. So if I have a feeling of panic and fear in a crisis, I can sit still, I can acknowledge it, I can say, yes, I've got the fear, but I'm going to feel the fear and do it anyway. And then I'm going to do what I want to do the right thing at that time. But if I don't have the emotional capacity to do that, I'll be all over the place. I'll be in the aisles at Woolworths, stealing toilet paper or grabbing toilet paper and hitting other people on the head with it in order to get what I want. Like, what a panic is that, to be doing that kind of silliness, when really it's all about us sharing and caring. So the next important law is the one of mutual reciprocity, which is where we all take care of each other. So we have this idea that there's an energy of reciprocity between all human beings and all living things. There's a napaji relationship. It's equal and caring. It's giving and receiving. It's an equal sharing and giving. And it's a very subtle law in action. It's not something gross where I come and say, I lent you $100 last week, you're going to give it back to me? No, it's like, I know I did that because I wanted to help that person, and I know that one day that person will help me. It's that kind of, I don't need to keep count. I'm just here to be in that mutual relationship with other people. So as a leader, managing the self is very important. And many years ago, when I was in my 30s, a friend of mine developed a program called the Self-Managing Leadership and an academy called the Oxford Leadership Academy. And he's now put 33,000 people around the world through the Self-Managing Leadership program. And when I did it, this is when I learned about the self. I learned about it in my culture because I learned about it from my family, but I also learned about how to manage the self as a leader when I worked in a university with a lot of competing influences and competing needs. In times of crisis, we had all sorts of drama going on with various things. And, at 31, I was the director of Aboriginal education, had no idea how to write a strategic plan. And I thought, well, the best thing I know is how to meditate. I know how to be still. I know how to take care of myself. I know how to be respectful to other people. So I'm going to start managing myself. So it's on the basis of knowing my thoughts, knowing what my feelings are, and then deciding what my actions are going to be. So if I'm in a crisis, whatever that crisis is, I always think about, I want to be in the eye of the storm. And to be in the eye of the storm, I have to get over my fear, and I have to use my courage. I have to let that courage grow, and I have to say, I'm going to have courage. I'm going to take my courage and I'm going to step up. So we were taught in our clan to step up when something needed to be done and to step back when we needed to withdraw or pack it away. We didn't need to be involved. So I think I can't stop my thoughts, but what I can do is think about what my thoughts are telling myself, and then what feelings are coming out of those thoughts, and then I choose what I will do. So it's about knowing what my being is, knowing how I'm feeling, how I'm thinking, And then, okay, how am I going to act in this crisis? And in order to do that, you have to be at this point of stillness here in the center. You know, and that point of stillness is in the silence of being. Many Aboriginal people would sit for hours just in silence. Imagine being out in the bush here with no white people around, with no TVs, no cars, no horses, just being out with the birds and the animals. Imagine how still they learn to be. When I go out and visit my relatives at Uluru, that country is so still, you automatically just become still. So what I'm interested in doing, in caring for the self, and then showing other people how to do that, because they'll automatically be drawn to a person who is calm in times of crisis, is I watch my mind, how it creates the thoughts, and I use my intellect, which is in my soul, to know my feelings, to discriminate, to judge and decide, which is part of the powers of leadership that are innate in my soul. And I allow myself to make the decision about what I'm going to do in my action. Maybe the action is nothing. Maybe the action is to sit still. So let's talk about what the inner self is. The inner self is actually your spirit self, your spiritual self. You can call it whatever you like. In our clan, we call it the Kurumpa, the inner self or the soul. It innately, the word innate means I'm born with it. They never disappear. They are part of my soul. They come with me into my physical body. They leave my physical body when I leave. They go into my next physical body when I'm reborn. So I contain these 8 powers, and I'm going to talk about what they are in a minute, and 35 virtues. So virtues are like love, mercy, empathy, compassion, simplicity, harmony, these kinds of things. And I choose when I need to use them. It also contains my personality. So my soul contains my personality, and that always impacts the way in which I will act. So if I tend to an angry or violent personality, it may override my intellect and my thinking. And so it's really important to learn how to manage the self through knowing the self. My soul also contains all my memories and my feelings, and it is the powerhouse of my thoughts, words, and actions. In our culture, we're taught that our thoughts, words, and actions have to be the same. So I can't be sitting here thinking, oh, you know, I really can't stand Juanita, whatever her name is, because of the way she goes on. But then when I go and meet her down at the art gallery, I'm really nice to her and I talk to her and I'm lovely up front, but then I'm really nasty over here. I've got to actually be the same. I have to be congruent. So the self needs to learn how to live and be with the self. One can only do that through the practice of some type of inner practice, whether it's yoga, sitting still, swimming in a pool in silence, whatever it is, it usually involves stillness and it usually involves silence. So gaining a spiritual practice of some sort helps me take care of the self. And if I give time to it, it has an amazing impact. So I started meditation, open-eyed meditation, when I was 25. I'm 62 now, so it's been about 36 years. And so I have a regular daily practice which starts very early in the morning. But when I first started, I couldn't do anything. But now I can sit and be still within a second and have the power to discriminate, to change my mind, to do whatever I want in a second. So it actually has a very, the yoga that I practice has an impact on your mind. So let's talk about the 8 hidden powers of leadership that are innately in the soul, which I get you to think, I want you to think about, because actually you can use them. They're like riding a bike. The more you use these, the more it helps you decide how you will be in any given moment. And as I learned from one of my elders who's now passed, Kumanarala Randall, being in the moment is the only place to be. There's no point being in the future or the past. Being in this present moment is where I need to be in order to understand myself, to know my feelings, to know my intellect. So we start with the power to tolerate. There are 8 powers. The power to tolerate is where we begin, because it's where I start listening. I listen to myself, I listen to other people, and I learn how to tolerate the environment around me. I've been going to India every year for 36 years, and I see people living in very intolerable conditions. I go out to Uluru regularly 3 or 4 times a year to see my relatives. They live in intolerable conditions, and yet their power to be still and to tolerate those conditions is enormous. Many people in the city could not do that. They would whinge and whine about not having a running shower, running toilet, not being able to get a job. They'd want to go and stay in the 5-star resort every night. You know, the power to tolerate is very powerful. Then I have the power to adjust. So I learn how to adjust to the things around me. And it's amazing what you can do. The power to discriminate is learning how to discern and make judgments. So it's part of the process of decision making. So if I'm in a crisis and I'm in the eye of the storm, I can make a decision about how I'm going to act. Am I going to run crazy, like we're all going to run out of toilet paper today? Or am I going to be very calm and still about it? You know, I didn't go and buy toilet paper. I didn't need to. It just ended up coming to me. And now the supermarket's full of toilet paper. I didn't have to go and buy thousands of bales of toilet paper, which is what a lot of panicked people did, thinking they were going to lose food. I remember when there were no pasta on the shelves. And yet I went to the supermarket 2 or 3 times a week and I thought, well, I'll just eat something else. People were crazy with a small thing like that. So the power to judge then enables me to decide, what action am I going to take? So say I have to face a fire or a flood, then I have the power and the courage to face it when I make that decision. Like I've had to make decisions in my life and stick by those decisions. I became a whistleblower once and it was very difficult to live with that for years afterwards due to the legal business. However, I made the decision at the time because it was the right and the moral thing to do, and I couldn't do it in any other way. So I had then the power to face whatever came to me. The power to cooperate, I had to cooperate. You know, you have to cooperate eventually in your life. You have to make choices about whether you will or you won't. The power to withdraw is about stepping back. Do I really have to be involved in this situation? Is this where I need to be? It's about boundaries, boundary setting. The power to pack up is to be able to put something away. It's the letting go. It's the, am I going to go on and on and on and on? I knew a woman when I was a child who went on and on and on about the weather. Everything she did every day depended on the weather. And she never stopped, shut up talking about the weather. She was so engrossed in what the weather was doing, she couldn't decide what she was doing. So the power to pack up is about, okay, it's going to rain today. Well, I'm not going outside to have that 30-minute walk in the pouring rain. I'm going to wait until the sun comes. So the power to pack up is putting away all that emotional baggage. When I got divorced, it was like, okay, I put that aside. Now I can have a relationship with my ex-husband because that one's done. There's a reason for that. And that's done now. And now we can do this. We can co-parent. We can do all these other things. So the 8 powers of leadership are innate within you. You just have to choose to use them. This is part of self-care. Here they are just in a different setting. Listening, available, tolerance, adapting, discrimination, decision-making, responsibility, and team spirit. Now, I bet you didn't know that you were all born with these. You were all born with these. Goody, goody, you get to use them. So this is how they happen in leadership practice, because as a leader, you have to do all of these things, especially with all the people and the processes you have to work with. And there's Mr. Ian, which means I must be getting to the end of this, which must be really close. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do after today is Laura and Francis have a sheet called Values, Working Out Your Value System. And it's going to ask you to think about what's your emotional, spiritual value system, because it enables you to take care of yourself. It enables you to set boundaries. It helps you to know when you need space and when you need to take care of your own wellness. You know, it's when you know you need to take one of those mental days off. You know, I take my birthday off every year and I take myself away from the human race. I just go and spend my days with it. The day my little dog died, I do the same thing because I want to go and remember and be still with those things because I value them. So this, it's a very simple exercise. I'd like you to journal it over a period of time and write down in a book. It'll tell you exactly what to do and what to go through. And then to start to use your values on a daily basis helps you become a leader of value and a leader who cares not just about the self, but about everyone else. So now we're going to do a little meditation. Is that all right with you, Ian? Yes, we're going to do a little meditation. There's his pretty face. So I'm going to read you.
My candle going, Auntie.
Oh, I don't even know how to get out of that. I stopped. Oh, there it is. What's your candles going?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, look at that. That's so beautiful. So now I'm gonna maybe read you this beautiful thing. And what I'd like you to do is just to sit quietly in the space in which you are, whether it's on a chair or you're on the floor or you're up against a wall. I just want you to sit very quietly, and I'm going to read something, maybe take you on a little journey. I'll take you on a little journey, I think, because Ian can send you the pretty little PowerPoint and Dadiri thing later. So we'll take you on a little journey. Let me just get my little thing here. Okay, so everybody just relax in a nice relaxing position. I'll turn this up to see if you can hear it. Ian, nod if you can hear this. Okay. We're all going to go on a little journey. I want you to just listen to your breath. Relax into the chair, the space that you're sitting in. Let your feet just relax. Let your fingers and toes let go. And just concentrate on the breath coming in and out of your lungs. And just allow it to gently raise and lower your diaphragm. Now concentrate on the feeling through your nostrils in your mouth. The air is coming in, the air is going out. And as it goes in, and as you let go of all the tension in your body, you relax into the space. Just let all your muscles go, tell your body to relax. Think of yourself as a peaceful being. Our natural sense is to be at peace. And so to think of myself as a peaceful being, I let myself know that I am at peace. My body is resting in peace. And as you do, just imagine yourself walking through a forest. As you are walking through the forest, you see the canopy of trees above your head, and you can feel the sunlight coming through the circle of light above your head, through the canopy of trees. See that canopy of trees now. Feel the soft earth beneath your feet. Feel the leaves cool underneath your feet. Hear the sound of the birds. And in the distance you hear the sound of Aboriginal people singing, the didgeridoo playing. Now just walk through the forest with your companions, relaxed, silent and still. And in the distance you hear the sound of the water in a river running quietly and gently in the background. Drawn as you are now to walk down towards this sound of water flowing. Walk now towards the sound of the river. As you go towards the sound of the river, you hear also the sound of the didgeridoo calling you. And as you come closer, you hear the voices of people singing. And go now down to the water as you feel the coldness under your feet and the sand by the side of the river. And in front of you, you see an amazing golden river. And now go towards the golden river And gently put your feet in. You feel that the water is very warm. And on the other side, you see a group of Aboriginal people singing, beckoning you to go into the water because this is their healing river. They are calling you to come to their healing river. Now walk into the water and just allow the water to take you gently. Feel its warmth as it flows across your skin. And just let your arms and your legs go and the water will hold you up. And now just roll in the water and let the water cover your body, knowing that the energy of this water, this river, is a healing energy. And the gold in this river is a healing energy that will allow you to let go, to be still, to be calm, to be in touch with the self. And now just allow yourself to flow. Let everything go. As the river takes you on its water and lets you just gently drift. You hear in the background the sound of men singing. You feel you belong. And now just let the water flow and let yourself go as you come close. Allow the water to take you to the banks, to its edge, knowing that you have let go of whatever you do not need, for this water can take it from you today. And allow yourself to let go of any burden that you carry, any thoughts that make you afraid. Know that you are strong and beautiful in the self. Now the water will bring you to the edge. Come back up into the sunshine and allow yourself to dry off by the side of the river, knowing that this river is always there for you, always available for when you need to be healed or to let go. And you see your companions with you now. You come together in the sunshine. Walk back up along the path towards the forest, knowing that there is something different about you now. You are lighter, you are more joyful, you are at peace. And now walk up through the forest. Feel the leaves underneath your feet, the soft dew of the grass, the moisture in the air as the sun begins to fade. You see it gently coming through the canopy of trees above your head. You feel the gentle wind on your face. And you hear the sounds of the singers going into the distance. And now come back up through the forest. Come back up to this place. And gently come back to the space in this waking place. And allow yourself to feel your lungs, to feel the air going in and out of your lungs. Allow yourself to hear the sounds around you, to feel the energy back in your toes and your fingers. And move your toes and fingers now and come back into the energy of your body. Feel your legs, feel your space in the chair, feel yourself against the back of the chair, and bring the energy back into your body. And allow yourself to come back into your waking presence, wherever you are in your room. And just be still, allowing the breath to come back into the body. Now allow yourself to be in this place with all of us. Well, I think that one's done.
Aunty Tjanara, it was so wonderful that we had that time. It feels that there is several times happening right now. And you and I have a very deep relationship. And we've had many special times together. But I feel like there is a time where people who have found themselves in times of unemployment, like members of my family and friends, they're really having to reflect inwards and they're taking time. And then I feel like on the other side of things where people are employed, there's been an increase where time has us and we don't have time. So thank you for allowing ourselves the opportunity to find time and to share with us sacred law, sense of self, and to find oneself from inward to the outward, and the reciprocal relationship that comes from that to the inward being. I have a deep respect for you, and I'm so honored that you and I have worked together for some time. I'm conscious of the fact we've gone over time. Siobhan, is it okay if we ask a few questions? Because I'm conscious of the fact that you've only got an hour. Cool, thank you, Siobhan. We have Aunty Tjanara. What practices do you use to distinguish ego from self in thought? Also, I'm interested in hearing about the difference between the independent and the sacred leader, if possible, from Janina Robinson.
Okay, so Gina, I just wrote back an answer. So essentially, the ego is usually a feeling of negative need. It's usually a negative feeling of need, like of want, like a small child that throws a tantrum. Whereas the self is a more pure and positive sense of knowing. When I know the self is at resting place to be at peace. So the self is usually at peace, whereas the ego is never at peace. The ego is always wanting something. I mean, it's what it needs to do. It's psychologically established in that way. However, in terms of ego, in terms of leadership, there are sets of traits about what an egotistical leader looks like. And Robert Kegan, who was the theorist that I followed around educational leadership from Harvard, he wrote about this in his theories, which is what I write about in my PhD. But I have a slide on another PowerPoint around sacred leadership that actually talks about the difference between independent and sacred and egotistical leaders, which I could send to Ian and you could get a copy of it from him. So Ian, I could just do like a little slide with the differences in terms of the levels of leadership that you could give to anyone who asks for it. So I could send that to you. Yeah, so the differences between independents and sacred leaders is this: independent people are working towards becoming sacred leaders. What Robert Kegan discovered was when he did a number of research projects, but he did them with 3,000 business leaders in America and some in Europe, he discovered that 8% of those leaders were sacred leaders on the basis of what he considered sacred leaders to be. So we worked out what those traits were. And essentially, sacred leaders have an all-integrated way of seeing the world. So they're empathic. They know what their how do I explain it? They know what their boundaries are, and they know how to set those boundaries. They know how to be empathic. They know what their value systems are. They know how to use those value systems in times of need. There are actually quite a lot of traits. I'm just trying, it's downloading from the iCloud. I'm just getting up a couple of little documents that I've got around what is a sacred leader that Kegan said. It's just taking a minute to download from the internet. Give me a second, I'll just dig it out. So egotistical leaders tend to be my way or the highway. So an egocentric leader is 15% of adults end up here. They're incapable of perceiving themselves separate from their own needs. A bit like a child. They're always looking out for themselves. They're incapable of integrating their needs with the needs of others, and they don't make decisions based on the impact on others. In contrast, a sacred leader is, they see the limits of their own value systems. They're not just interested in their own business, but they're interested in the country and the world. They're interested in the impact of everything they do on the world. They are most able to focus on a whole, systemic, holistic view of things. It's the highest level of thinking. They are usually visionary people who shape the future of the planet in a positive and nurturing way. They have spirituality and sacredness, and it holds a very significant life in their own personal lives. People look up to them. People tend to put them on a pedestal. Kegan suggested people like Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, the Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa, people who actually did things that made a difference in the world, who were visionary, that changed things, but they were still human. You know, Nelson's children always talked about him as their father and the humanness of being a father. You know, he was a strict father. So even though he was an amazing person who did amazing things, he started his career off being a lawyer who was involved in violent retribution against the South African state. And then because of his years in prison, he transformed that energy into something powerful that he used later on. A person who is at interdependent level, which is between independent and sacred, has developed a strong and resilient self-aware ego. They have a value system that is truly theirs. They master the skill of balance to see and empathize with others. They've developed their own views of the world. They recognize their own power and they use it in a good way. They claim the power they have and they become a force for change. They are authors of their own lives. They know that they are responsible in the truest sense for not only themselves, but every other living thing on the planet. They understand their power and they create their own feelings. They understand their source of their own values. They deal well with conflict. They're not dependent on others for their self-esteem. They can commit to an institution but not be engulfed or overwhelmed by it. They can be part of a group and the same, not be dependent on it. They are beyond self-blame and blaming other people. People who blame people tend to be at egotistic leadership level. And egotism is, well, yeah, there you go. 15% of people stay at egocentric leadership. 40 to 60% stay at socialised, which is a classist level.
It's so good to hear all of this again, Aunt, because of course I read your PhD that talked about this in great detail. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Continue.
No, you're right. Yeah, so I wrote about it in great detail in my PhD. So that's just a little bit of an outline about that. And if anyone wants that, I can make a little 4 PowerPoint slide system to send you with that on it.
Am I also able to share maybe one more question?
Yeah.
And before I do, are you able just to talk to people briefly about your book that is available for people to buy if they wish? That can talk into some of these details in more lived cultural and human development, experiential based sums of your life, Aunty Tjanara?
Yes, please. So do you want me to talk about that?
Well, just quickly before I ask the last question, maybe you can talk about the book.
Okay, so my PhD is going to come out in a book called Sacred Leadership. I'm not sure when, maybe next year. It takes a bit of time because you've got to edit all this stuff. But it'll talk about how Aboriginal culture creates sacred and visionary leaders through our educational governance development system, which is what I discovered. And it also talks about how you can recover from trauma by recovering your cultural, spiritual self, and that it's cross-clan and cross-cultural. So you can go to other clans in order for this to happen. It doesn't have to just be in your own clan if they have lost a lot of the Chukupa knowledge. You can go to other clans in order to gain that connection and learning and healing. And that was the experience of some of the people I interviewed during my PhD studies, particularly for this. So it should be coming out next year as an academic text called Sacred Leadership. And I've written a memoir called A Long Way from No-Go, which you can buy from Wild Dingo Press, which talks about my journey as well. Talks about going through a lot of crises and getting to a good place.
It's just over there. I've got a signed copy.
Oh, I'll show you a copy, everybody. Can I show them a copy?
There you go. You can go get it online, and you must. It's absolutely
Buy
wonderful.
from Wild Dingo Press in Melbourne.
One more question. Hello, Auntie. I've been struggling to let go and healing of lack of oneself love as a result of multiple traumas from my own childhood. But finding stillness and peace has been challenging as the battles and wars we are fighting within our communities seem to be endless. How does one navigate this, Auntie Dr. Tjanara?
Oh, such a beautiful question. Thank you. Well, as Ian was reading that, I realised, you know, that's my story. That's the story of my life. You know, since I was a child, and many of the same things, the generational trauma and all the things that go with it, and then all the traumas of adulthood and those things. And it is a journey, but it's a journey of choosing. I recall the decision I made, the decision to recover. So that meant giving up all drugs and alcohol, giving up bad relationships, going and learning about boundaries, going and doing therapy. So I've done therapy since I was 30 years old, and I'm now 62, and I still go every week because it's very healing and it's very healthy to look at the self. Practicing a spiritual cultural life, so ceremony and sacred cultural life, as well as a spiritual practice, whatever that is, finding a really good quality therapist who understands whatever issues you have in your life, whether it's abuse, violence, addiction, whatever. I found very good therapists. It was the only way I could do it. Otherwise, you end up in the mental health system where people just don't get it unless you've got a very good quality person working there who gets it. It's important to set boundaries around abusive relationships with families. I've had to do that with my own family. It's very difficult, especially when you love them. But you have to say there are times where you cannot be in relationships with people who want to put you down because you want to recover. And let's face it, there are people who are not well in our communities, but it's also having the empathy to know that if you have a well life, that maybe that will have an impact on other people. I mean, I chose because for many years as a teenager, I wanted to kill myself, and I tried many times. I'd been severely abused as a child and by people in the Catholic Church. And so by the time I got into my 20s, I had to make a decision. I hadn't managed to kill myself. So I had to decide, am I going to get well and show other people that you can get well and that you do not have to live with this constant drama, constant addiction, constant abuse, constant just horrible stuff. So now I can say, look, I recovered. I don't want to kill myself. I'm completely recovered from the damages that happened to me. And I had a lot of them, you know, even with all sorts of diagnosed shit. So I've still managed to come through that and go, no, I am a loveful, loving, a powerful human being. So I've come to understand what my elders taught me. And I had two particular elders, one who's still alive, who have loved me unconditionally. And because of that unconditional love, I learned to love myself. So it's about finding people who will give you that unconditional regard, just because you're a human who deserves to exist and follow your purpose in life. So I hope
my grandmother, the late Aunty Goreng Colless, and you met my grandmother, if I'm not, when you came up to my country and know my Auntie Sharon, you know my community.
I do.
They have offered me that unconditional love when I was a child, and I echo what you're talking about. And you know I have a passion in culture, education, and human development with my experiences with New York University, Nacer Downs College, and all that sort of stuff. You have to, what I've learned about our cultural education, what I really loved about your PhD, Auntie, is that one must never control the knowledge on the candidate. When I was brought up in my cultural and human development, I was encouraged to be me. And I hear what you're saying in this presentation, and to enact that and to nurture. The elders come in and they nurture. What is that?
Yeah, they
And
just know.
They just know. And
they have that unconditional love, that kanyini, yeah? They have that ability to just be with you as another being.
Yeah.
And the thing about the Anangu that I learned from being adopted by them is that they never tell you what to do. They let you find out your own way. And in that way, you come to really understand yourself.
Which A.K.M. Austin, who is an educational theorist, calls guided-based discovery research, as opposed to what he also terms, which is a result of industrialized education, command-style pedagogical methods. And is it commended upon, or is it something that's guided out? And that's something that you and I have discussed with the developmental aspects of the custodianship program, which is now in delivery with Aunty Associate Professor Henrietta Murray as our elder in residence, and you as one of the contributors of the national consultation we did to do that. I'm conscious of the time. We've gone 17 minutes over time, but I just want to express my deep thanks to Siobhan and Kylie for sticking around and translating for us a little bit over time, so that we're able to make sure that this information is accessible to all the diversities of the rainbows that we are as human beings. And I hope that this has provided you the opportunity to stand united, but to know oneself from that united front. With that in mind, Aunty, if it's okay with you, I might do a bit of a roundup of the language groups that have been calling in. Is that all right?
Yep.
Let me find them. We have Wurundjeri, we have Gadigal Eora, Bidjigal, Wangal, Darawa, Jagara, Durable, India, Burgurung, Banjalan, Yerubara, Naro, Yagara, Liturura. I'm still learning how to say that. Auntie, pronounce it right for me.
Oh, I can't say that word. It's a strong word.
It's a hard one, isn't it?
Good word.
Yeah, the Tasmania mob, we love them.
Lurituria.
Yeah.
I apologise for my lack of language pronunciation.
The Woodjack Nungan, the Wurundjeri, the Darak, and the Gunungara. We pay respect
Wakka
to the
Wakka and the Wulli Wulli.
and the Wulli Wulli and Wakka Wakka people. Thank you so much, Siobhan. Thank you, Kylie. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Francis. Thank you, everyone who joined us today and stuck around. And Aunty Tjanara, Aunty Dr. Tjanara Goreng Goreng, I am so indeed grateful to be your brother, and I've learned so much from you, and I miss our Dolly Parton car trips across Australia. And I adore you. Lots of love to you, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you everyone. Palya.